was little, I remember bombs falling and crouching with my brother in our bedroom.
Serj Tankian went from bomb shelters in Beirut to global superstardom, a journey that almost never happened.
They're not really supposed to be popular. They're too weird.
He's one of the most iconic rock stars ever, a lifelong activist, a painter, and a full-on Renaissance man. This is the insane story of Serj Tankian. Serj Tankian didn't grow up in some comfy LA suburb chasing a music dream in his parents' garage. He was born in 1967 in Beirut, Lebanon, right in the middle of a war. And all four of his grandparents were survivors of the Armenian genocide.
All my grandparents were survivors of the genocide from both sides. And my grandfather, from an early age, both my grandfather and my grandmother from my mom's side, who I knew better, would talk about their family and the things that occurred, not in specific detail or gruesome detail, of course, and at times wouldn't be able to talk about it out of the pain that they suffered. But, you know, it's my closest link to a family tree that has been cut off at a certain point because I don't know who my other relatives were after a certain point.
While most kids were watching cartoons, Serj was hearing air raid sirens and running to bomb shelters. This wasn't a place for childhood dreams, it was survival.
I remember stuff like my school and the streets and just specific visual memories of Lebanon. But I also remember the last few months where the schools were closed down and we couldn't leave the house because there were bombs going off everywhere. And you can hear bombs falling in the sky, and it's a memory that doesn't leave you ever. If you've ever experienced that, whether you're in Eastern Europe or anywhere you've been in the world, if you ever hear a bomb fall, it's something you will never, ever forget.
At 7, Serj's life flipped upside down when his family escaped from the war in Lebanon and moved to the US.
Obviously, coming to the US from Lebanon was a culture shock, you know, and it was at the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. My parents were able to get us out of there. And my dad was born in Syria, so he couldn't come with us. He had to send us ahead, and he had to go and bribe his way to get all the paperwork that he needed to be able to get the fuck out of there.
Los Angeles didn't fix everything. Serj was a survivor, but also an immigrant in a foreign land, wondering what the hell he was supposed to turn into.
Man, that was like, you know, the disco era, what an incredible time to be in Hollywood, California. And it was just
It was a roller disco era.
It was a roller disco era.
Did you do any roller disco?
Of course I did. Yeah.
As
a kid.
Me too, bro.
That cultural collision shaped everything that came after. In Los Angeles, Serj quickly mastered English, and with it came responsibility. As a young kid, he found himself translating contracts and even legal documents for his father, forced into adult roles long before most kids even learn how the world works.
You know, as a kid coming, to the US at that time, I mean, we were ducking in our houses with bombs falling overhead,
Not in Hollywood, in Beirut.
Not in Hollywood,
yeah.
No. We were ducking from hookers and pimps falling overhead in Hollywood.
Okay.
No.
He didn't grow up playing guitar or the piano as a kid. He didn't have dreams of becoming a rock star or anything like that. In fact, he didn't even consider making a career out of music until much later in life.
I didn't know I wanted to do music professionally at the time. I was working with my uncle in the jewelry industry. I was very lost. So I was working with my uncle long days downtown LA in the jewelry district. And I was dealing with a lot of lawsuits with my parents. Like, it was a very negative time, very tough time. And I thought, shit, I deal with a lot of lawyers, so maybe I should be a lawyer. I've got pretty good left brain activity going on. I remember signing up for the LSAT exam and going down to Long Beach to take these classes to learn how to take the LSAT. And everyone was so happy being there, and I was fucking miserable. I hated lawyers at the time. And here I am wanting to be a lawyer because I just couldn't figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. I knew I didn't want to be in the jewelry industry or running a business, whatever. And after that one night of taking those classes, I was driving home. I had a Jeep Wrangler. I remember it was raining, very dramatic. And I really, I had to go, I always say I had to go to the far reaches of who I don't want to be to admit to myself who I really am. And I was in my car and I literally stopped and this is bullshit. I don't want to do all this shit, you know? And that was the day that changed my life.
Chasing that fire, Serj bounced from jam session to jam session, testing the waters.
From then on, anything I did was with the idea that I'm going on this path and I got to do whatever I got to do to be on this path. And it took years to be able to pay, work in other stuff, day jobs, and I did accounting. I started my own software company for years and ran it, which became not quite successful, but this is pre-internet, pre-Windows, you know, DOS.
After plenty of dead ends, he finally landed on the crew who'd end up becoming his bandmates, the ones crazy enough to build something real.
I was in one band. We would rehearse in North Hollywood, Burbank, at various rehearsal studios, and Darren joined another band of friends, and we would share rehearsal space, and him and I became friends. And you know, the serious guys continue. Everyone else just kind of dissipates over time. So Darren and I were the first ones to actually start collaborating. I remember the first time we sat down together. It was in a rehearsal studio that we were sharing. He was playing guitars for a band, and I was playing keyboards in another band. So we were just friends because we shared rehearsal space, and it was a large group of friends, 2 bands. And so I remember him sitting down and he started playing something on an acoustic guitar or whatever, on guitar, but not plugged in, you know, and he started singing something, and I started singing with him, and we immediately noticed that our 2 voices had this really incredible harmonic resonance together, you know, that it was a unique combination of sounds. And what I remember appreciating about him was he was like so serious about music. I was serious as well at that point, you know, and so we got along and we started collaborating on music. And that lasted 8 months, and then System of a Down formed with Chavo, and then John's the latest one to join.
Once System of a Down was born, there was no turning back. The rise of System of a Down wasn't quick or easy. They fought their way through the strange and messy Los Angeles metal scene of the mid-90s. A scene still trying to figure out what came after hair metal, thrash, and grunge. In the middle of all that, 4 Armenian American kids showed up, not fitting into any box.
It was really a spectacle to see because we didn't look or sound like anyone else. It was just like, it was kind of like, did they just put people on drugs on stage?
But there are certain rules of heavy metal, let's say, that everyone sort of follows those rules.
It's a loyal fan base.
Yeah.
They like it.
And System of a Down were a heavy band, you could say a heavy metal band, who didn't follow those rules. So they didn't have the rhythms that you'd hear in a typical, you know, you wouldn't hear a Metallica rhythm, you'd hear a System of a Down rhythm, which was different, dun, 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 like different gallops and different, and it's rooted in their Armenian heritage. So they took elements from folk music and brought that into heavy metal.
The name System of a Down actually came from one of Darren's early poems titled Victims of a Down. Chavo suggested tweaking it to system It sounded broader, darker, and easier to market, while keeping that vibe of something broken and falling apart. The name fit their vibe perfectly. Chaotic, political, angry, and ominous.
But there was still so much crap to cut through, especially with each new group sounding more cookie cutter than the next, putting more and more of an emphasis on either a larger visual gimmick or just trying to sell this mall goth image. But System of a Down was a much needed breath of fresh air in an ocean of cringy rap verses and down-tuned two-note riffs.
By 1995, System of a Down was playing regularly in LA's club scene, venues like the Roxy and the Whiskey A Go Go, historic stages for countless metal acts. But System was different. Instead of flashy guitar solos and party anthems, they delivered complex rhythms, unconventional melodies, lyrics confronting genocide and injustice, and Serj's unique blend of operatic singing and harsh growls.
I really love his very nasally timbre, sits up very high in the throat, but has such a strong sense of pitch. Meanwhile, his dynamic and cartoony shrieks and growls and screams remain unmatched in metal in their energy and character.
At first, they were just an underground band with a small following. Armenian fans came to support them, and metal fans tired of the same old formulas started paying attention. But what really started the machine moving was their relentless self-promotion and demo tapes.
I mean, we did our work in terms of building an audience ground up, touring, opening for Slayer, you know, playing Ozfest. We were on the road for that first 2-3 years, like pretty much the whole time. So we were in a radio band trying to make it at the radio. We were winning fans over every night by performing. So that was a part of it, obviously. But part of it is also luck. You know, the movement of music, especially on the radio, transferred over from Seattle to LA. So it became from grunge. Suddenly you started hearing Korn and Deftones on the radio and new metal and all of this type of stuff. A community that we had fit in because we were in Los Angeles and we had started playing with, you know, as an opener to, you know, bands like those, you know. So in a way, we got lucky because the radio format changed as we came up. So timing was essence here as well, you know.
Between 1995 and 1997, System of a Down put out a few demo tapes. They were rough, raw, but already showed how unique their sound was.
They clearly didn't fit, but they were so good that they transcended not fitting.
By 1997, word about them reached Rick Rubin, the legendary producer behind Def Jam, Beastie Boys, Run DMC, Slayer, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Johnny Cash, and many more. Rubin was always looking for bands that didn't follow the rules, and System fit that perfectly.
I like weird things. I like being surprised. I like hearing something I haven't heard before. I like being challenged by music.
He saw them live and was immediately sold. The energy, the chaos, and Serj's freak of nature voice hit him like a kick to the balls.
I remember going to see them the first time I went to see them play. They played at the Viper Room in LA. It was packed and 200 people. And
Sold out.
And I remember watching the show and just laughing. I laughed the whole time. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, but in a good way. It wasn't like laughing like, what a joke. It was just so over the top and so extreme and like Armenian folk dancing with heavy metal riffs and wild political lyrics and screaming. It was crazy music.
And that night he brought Tom Morello with him. And I remember seeing Rick sitting at the top of a booth, like on the seats of the booth, and because there was a crowd of people, and Viper Room's not that big, you know, and he was laughing. He was laughing like I'm kind of like, what the fuck is this laughing kind of thing? And I love that. Love that, because all of the music executives we were meeting were incredibly serious and trying to pitch us with go-to marketing terms, you know, in saying that I think maybe you can fit in here or there and the other, and we're just like, what the fuck are they talking about, you know? Do they even like the music, you know? And when he left, I knew he got it. I knew he understood that we are dramatizing our music. We're going over the top, you know, everything we do is accentuated, but we mean it.
Actually, the first show he came to, he pulled us, it was at the Viper Room, and we went outside because he wanted to talk to us after the show. And he's like, yeah, I want this. I'm like, what? You already want this?
Ruben signed them to his label and produced their self-titled first album, System of a Down, released in the summer of 1998. Songs like The Funky Sugar and The Dark Spiders were released as early singles.
So Sugar was technically our first single off our first record.
Yeah.
And when I say single, it wasn't like the radio was playing it all over the place, all over the world or anything like that. There was a local station in Los Angeles that was playing it at nights, once in a while. You know, there was a DJ called Jed the Fish that on a specialty show that would play it on K-Rock. And I remember hearing it. And that's the first time I've ever heard one of our songs on the radio, which was like, you know, mind-blowing.
Even on their first album, System wasn't shy about politics. The opening track, Sweet Pea, attacked religious hypocrisy. War called out warmongers. And PLUCK, short for politically lying, unholy, cowardly killers, directly condemned the Armenian genocide. Critics paid attention. Pitchfork called it the most inventive crossover since Rage Against the Machine, and Kerrang put System of a Down at number 3 on its best albums of 1998 list.
They're not really supposed to be popular.
Right.
They're too weird.
Toxicity was the game changer. Dropped in September 2001, it kept their absurd sound, but made it a bit more accessible, debuting at number 1 in both the US and Canada.
Toxicity's official release date was just 7 days before the September 11th attacks in 2001, but the lyrics on this album were written as if they had the hindsight of the next 7 years of authoritarian garbage that the Bush administration would serve up. And it's kind of depressing to admit that this album's themes of pollution and addiction and private prisons and endless war, they're only more relevant now.
The singles blew up. Chop Suey, fast, intense, and full of dark imagery, became a massive hit.
It sounds so normal now. I've heard it so many times.
Yeah,
but the first time I heard it, I was like, wow.
It's definitely a head scratcher at first. And it has this big, do you know that song? Mm-hmm. It has this big bridge section in it where Serj, the lyric writer, the singer, lyric writer, didn't have words for this one part of the song. And we were sitting in the library in my old house, and he said, "Well, you know, I don't have words for this." And we were finishing. It's like, okay, any ideas? He's like, he didn't have any ideas. And I said, okay, pick a book off the wall. I picked a book randomly off the wall. I said, open it to any page. Tell me the first phrase you see. He opened it. First phrase he sees. That's what's in the song, and it's a high point in the song. It's incredible. It's like magic. Pulling down.
Well, there was no vocals there because all I had was Father, 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 Father. That's all I had. I didn't have the whole.
Yeah.
I think you and Serj put that together with the Bible and.
Yeah, whatever book. I don't even know if it was a Bible. Whatever book it was, he pulled down and just randomly picked it. But that did happen.
Yeah, and so that's how that part came about.
Yeah.
And there you have it. You have Chop Suey, and it's our most famous song, the one that people recognize the most from System of a Down.
The title track, Toxicity, mixed melody with heaviness, while Aerials hit number 1 on Billboard's rock charts, and Rolling Stone ranked it among the best albums of the 2000s. Multiple Grammy nominations solidified System of a Down as international metal icons. In 2002, the band released Steal This Album, a collection of rarities and outtakes from the Toxicity sessions. Even if it didn't match the commercial heights of its predecessor, it still reached the US top 20, and Michael Moore directed the video for Boom. However, as much as Serj and Darren were the creative backbone of System of a Down, they were also its biggest friction point. Darren was becoming increasingly hands-on in the band's songwriting, bringing in full song structures and taking more control over the band's direction. Serj, meanwhile, wanted to experiment outside of metal, bring in orchestras, jazz, classical arrangements, and more overt political themes. The two respected each other, but their visions were starting to pull in different directions.
And it's also our progression. Listen, when Darren and I started working together, I didn't really write a lot of instrumental music. You know, I mostly wrote lyrics. I was the lyricist, I was the singer. And he didn't write any lyrics, he just wrote music, you know. But as time progressed and I played more musical instruments and I started becoming a songwriter, composer, and he started writing more lyrics, it kind of, you know, we started kind of covering each other's territory. And I was okay with that, because if he wrote lyrics, I was trying to encourage him to write more. Because I believe in artistic growth. I believe in progression. I don't believe in things staying the same way, because for music's sake, you know, otherwise the music becomes the same thing over and over again. That progression is necessary in every artist's life or in every group's life. So I was very encouraging of that. And I just wish that I got some of that back, right? And so that wasn't the case. And it was disappointing, and it became a creative difference over the band's path and whatnot over time.
In 2005, they made history by releasing a double album split into two parts: Mesmerize, released in May, and Hypnotize in November. Both debuted at #1 in the US, placing System alongside the Beatles, Tupac, and DMX as one of the few acts to achieve 2 #1 albums in a single year. In 2006, the single BYOB, an acronym that stands for Bring Your Own Bombs, earned the band their first Grammy win for Best Hard Rock Performance. After Hypnotize, however, System went on hiatus.
So I'm excited about the prospects of what else there is down the line. Each of the guys with their own stuff, myself, we all need time to do that. And when the time comes, if you know, we're all comfortable with coming back and doing this together, and you know, System will always be there for us.
The hiatus wasn't some ugly breakup. It felt more like Serj and Darren needing to catch their breath before their next creative argument. And that's when Serj took off in a whole new direction.
It's important to be productive. I'm a productive person. You're a productive person. Yeah. And it's important not to stay in these states that can kind of be just, you know, I don't want to say consequential, but something that breaks us down, and instead go, okay, let's move on from this. What is it that we're trying to solve? I like solving problems, you know. I like moving on from it, you know. Not because I want to deny the emotion or deny the trauma, but because if you get to the root of that emotion and trauma and you deal with that, then you can move on.
After the band, Serj's first solo record, Elect the Dead, in 2007, launched at #4 on the charts, solid proof he could carry himself without the band. He sounds like what happens when you throw Frank Zappa, Jello Biafra, Max Cavalera, a Balkan folk singer, and an apocalyptic street preacher into a blender and crank it to max.
When I wrote the songs for Elect the Dead and decided to arrange them in a rock fashion, I always heard them in an alternate type of way as well. In an acoustic or orchestral. I even did like stripped down strings for bonus tracks and stuff like that for the Elect the Dead premium package. So I did hear the songs interpreted differently. And when I got the chance to actually work with an orchestra, I was really excited to be able to actually, you know, realize that.
Then came Imperfect Harmonies, in 2010, where he mixed metal with strings and choirs. Let's be honest, some tracks on this record are weird in a not so great way, and a few just don't land. But that's part of what makes it special. It's bold, experimental, and packed with different sounds. Sure, not every idea works, but the album still delivers plenty of beautiful, standout moments. It's a messy gem, and that's the charm. Harakiri in 2012 followed, a concept album with biting sarcasm about this ancient Japanese ritual. Compared to his other solo albums, Harakiri feels a bit less experimental and a bit more mainstream, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a metal record, at least not in the traditional sense, but it's still packed with Serj's signature weirdness. Like everything Serj puts out, deep political and social themes percolate through the album, giving it substance beyond the sound.
I've been talking to a symphonic orchestra actually about doing the next record, not with rock instruments, but more jazz and orchestral. I think that's more of where my music's going. I'm growing as a composer, and I've been doing songs for film, video games. I started working on composing for theater, and it's something I've been wanting to do, so that's going to be my next record, yeah.
Only Serj Tankian would casually drop a classical symphony and a jazz fusion record in the same year. That was 2013 Orca Symphony No. 1 and Jazz's Christ, two projects that couldn't be more different, yet somehow made total sense for a guy like him. But he didn't stop there. He's put out instrumental ambient EPs in 2021 and even co-created a politically charged rock musical, Prometheus Bound, with Broadway's Steven Sater. It's a career defined by reinvention. He's also scored documentaries, video games, and Netflix shows like it's nothing. He even had a hand in the Game of Thrones' soundtrack. On the big screen, he scored the indie film 1915, which focused on the Armenian genocide, and was also credited as executive music consultant for the Christian Bale film The Promise. And when he's not making music, he paints. Since 2013, Serj has built a second career as a visual artist, creating over 100 original paintings.
For years, before I started painting, I always wondered how it would be to score paintings. And one day I just decided to just paint myself. And my first painting, which is called Disarming Time, basically had the first measure of the music painted on the canvas, like with musical clef and the notes. I used clocks without arms to denote the notes on the actual canvas, like we had a musical sheet, like huge painting. And I loved it. I loved the experience, but I also liked the painting itself. Like, had the output been bad, I would have never continued. Hello, it's me again for another session of I'm painting this shit. Let's see, I think I found a better angle for the camera so you can see what I'm doing. Hopefully. Still learning this stuff, but yeah, here we go. Not bad. Okay. I now have over 120, 130 paintings that I've done, all musically scored. And it's really fun because you see people walking into a gallery, either with headphones or not, and we use this app called Arlupa, which is made by a tech company in Armenia, actually. Oh. And it's an optical recognition app that recognizes the painting and just starts playing the music. And you just see people really getting deep into it because, the more you interact with multiple senses through art, the more of a stronger influence, a potent influence you can have.
The Armenian Mirror put it well. Serj is a mass of wonderful contradictions. Picture this, a pierced middle finger waving metal singer who will happily chat spiritual philosophy.
But as I grew older, I became more interested in the universality of all things, the truthfulness behind universality of all things. If this is true here, it should be true everywhere, you know? And so that led me into anywhere from kind of animism to Buddhism to learning about different religions.
He's the sort of guy who won't let your lazy label stick. He doesn't mind being called radical or weird. If anything, he planned it that way.
I feel very charmed and grateful to be where I am in life. And I mean, everything happens for a reason, right? So, you know, the yin and yang of that pull between the priority of music versus activism is a beautiful thing for a band, because what it does is it creates this tension, and that tension is within the music. It's within the songs, you know, the start and stop, the, you know, is this too political? Is this not too political? You know, and, you know, for a band to just have everyone agreeing on everything, it makes the music kind of vapid.
His latest project is a memoir titled Down with the System, a memoir of sorts, a rock star's guidebook of life and activism.
I really, really realized a lot of the mistakes I had made within the band specifically, writing the book. Yeah. I mean, I knew that my spirituality had created had misunderstandingly created passivity within me having to do with the band at a time where I needed to be proactive. But I just wasn't, for whatever reason, you know, whatever I was going through at the time. I was going through a breakup with my ex, all that. But I was in it. So I'm very careful in the book that no matter what our creative differences are with the guys in the band, I take responsibility for my own part as well. But I hadn't really owned up to my own passivity and kind of letting the reins go of the band in 2003, 2004. Writing the book really, really put me in touch with that more than anything else.
Serj Tankian's story isn't one of humble brilliance or safe wisdom. It's messy, fiery, and perfectly inconclusive. He sold around 40 million records and won awards aplenty, but he'll tell you fame or appeasement has zero value to him. What matters is impact.
Maybe that's what it is, that I won't give up the truth.
In a world where most rock stars eventually morph into harmless nostalgia acts, Serj Tankian stayed true to himself.
It's difficult to successfully lie through art.
A refugee kid from Beirut who turned trauma into art, grief into activism, and noise into meaning.
When I was little, I remember bombs falling and crouching with my brother in our bedroom at the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War in 1975. But we didn't experience that much of it. I know people that lived through it, you know?
Yeah.
And we soon left thereafter and immigrated to the US. But I still remember that haphazard feeling of whether a bomb could fall on our house, even though just a residential house. And that fear in a child, I think, is really traumatic. And it's led me to really be against any type of, you know, bombing in urban areas, because, you know, of course there's more missile guided, guidance has gotten better with technology and all that, but man, you're still killing a lot of civilians, and, you know, and that's unforgivable.
His voice carries the weight of a century of silent stories, but instead of drowning in it, he built something bigger. Long after the stage lights fade, his legacy will still echo, loud, uncomfortable, and impossible to silence.